Full-time political and the International LaRouche Political Organization. We have a class tonight lined up to give you a sense of the kind of solidarity and leadership it's required and has required in the past to change the paradigm we are in right now. I'm going to begin right now with I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go through the past months and the past week's development, which have been very rapidly changing the world we are living in. And it's really something you're not going to see in the media, or this is something you're not going to pick up like sound bites in the media. And what you saw pretty much in early September was Obama and the Saudis intent on going into a war with Syria. And what you saw was a population revolted against that. A war-weary population in the United States called into their Congress, called into their senators. Average people like yourself said, no, we're not going to go into a war. It's completely idiocy, and I'll go into some aspects of it later. And not only that, you also had a very strong move in institutions, both in Congress and military institutions, to this war mobilization. So what you had was Obama had to backtrack, had to get, without even informing his own cabinet. People like Chuck Hagel were told later, after the press conference, yeah, we're not going to go to war. And what you had was Obama got his ass handed to him, where the military said, if you go to war, the Congress will move to impeach you. So what you had was, but then the problem was people let Obama off the hook. And what you had later was a government shutdown orchestrated by Obama and his controllers in Wall Street with honchos in both parties. A government shutdown intent on creating a panic situation in the population. That we're in a crisis, we don't have enough money, so we got to cut somewhere. And for a little while, people were confused as to how to really make sense of this government shutdown. What's the intent? Why is this happening? Including our own associates. And it became very clear very soon when it was broken, the news was broken, and it was revealed to us and other people that before Obama would meet with any congressional leaders on this government shutdown crisis, the first people he met with were the top CEOs of Wall Street. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, Anshu Jain of Deutsche Bank, and others. Before Obama or anybody of the White House would meet with any congressional leaders in Congress or any senators from either party, the government shutdown crisis was already orchestrated and decided by Obama and these Wall Street CEOs. The intention was to create, do you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. I wasn't clear. Sorry. That's okay. So, yeah, the intention was to create a crisis to continue the hyperinflationary policies, continue the money printing, continue the buying of billions of dollars of worthless Wall Street shit which the Federal Reserve buys every month. So what you've had ever since then now is we're now at a tipping point. We're now at a point where either we can be the best generation or the last generation. And if you think that's a little too extreme, those were the exact words of John F. Kennedy. That we have a chance right now to either be the best generation, which is to move with our neighbors on this planet on a mission for cooperation, or we can stick to our present axioms and assumptions and fears and be the last generation and be our own destruction. So now I'm going to give you a little idea of why the situation is at a tipping point. The first is a lot to do with the health care, or rather the death care. Or rather they call Obamacare, which I don't know why, because Obama frankly does not care. So what you had since 2008 was you had with the coming in of Obama, with the coming in of these behavioral economists with Obama, people like Peter Orszag, Rahm Emanuel, Ezekiel Emanuel, all these behavioral economists who Obama hired to draft his Obamacare, the realization of the population and LaRouche was that, holy shit, this is a policy to kill us. Because when you're putting accountants in charge of healthcare, when you're putting a dictatorship of money over the priority of providing healthcare, of providing care and service to the sick and elderly, that's a Nazi healthcare plan. And what you had in 2008 was, despite Obama's overwhelming majority in the election, you had a mass strike across the population, where you had congressmen, besieged with riots pretty much in their town hall meetings, where they would have these regular town hall meetings they've been having for so many years, but suddenly there's an outpouring of anger in the population. The result of which was in 2010, the Democratic Party got their ass kicked. You had a majority of the Democrats in the Congress who, despite being incumbents in their districts for many decades, in some cases, lost their election just because they would not budge from backing up Obama, because they stuck to the party line, which is we gotta stand with Obama, we gotta stand with the healthcare, which the population hated for legitimate reasons. And what you had ever since then, since 2009, was LaRouche identified Obama's personality, that this is it. With the healthcare plan now in full effect, we are putting now the mustache on Obama's face. This plan is an intention to kill people, and Obama knows it. Obama's willfully going along with it. So that resulted in our famous poster, which was immediately brought into the Library of Congress also. It's archived there for changing political opinion in a very short period of time. And the intention was to tell the population, wake up. You are dealing with the same policies you've been putting up since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And what you've had ever since then is LaRouche and our organization leading the fight in the United States on principle that you've got to impeach Obama and shut down Wall Street. The result was about a month or 2 months ago, when Obama's Affordable Care Act finally started coming into effect, millions of people got notices in their mailboxes. Millions of people more got to know that they are not eligible for health care, or their premiums are going up, or their chemotherapy centers are shutting down, hospitals are shutting down. I mean, we had a very vivid case where our team was organizing in Washington State in one of the counties, and the population, we've organized in that town before, but when we set up there about a month and a half ago, we had an outpouring of angry, emotional people. The reason was their town doctor, a family practitioner who has been practicing there for about 20 years, who has a family practice which was started by his grandfather, committed suicide because he would not be reimbursed by the Medicare, because his whole clinic was being shut down because it's not profitable enough, because you're not penalizing your patients enough, because you're giving too much care. Because that's what's happening across the United States, where private practices, rural hospitals, small clinics in rural areas, because it makes no sense having, the United States has had no infrastructure to build large hospitals in rural areas, so what you have is basically small clinics sustaining this rural population. But now, with the denial of Medicare payments to these clinics are either being forced to lay off staff, or shut down, or go to drastic measures. I mean, we know as a fact, through the United States Bureau, that the suicide rate in the United States and in Europe has gone up. So that's the policy you're dealing with where you have a culture who's being crushed, whose optimism and all hope is being crushed. But that's when LaRouche, about a month ago, brought up that we now need medical professionals coming out in the open, saying what Obamacare is. Enough of people coming to our table, contributing, throwing $100, $500, I agree with you, but I can't sign up. That's not what's going to change history. We need people putting their life on the line, like us, coming out, stating your name, and saying, I am a doctor, I'm a medical professional, and this policy is mass murderous. And we had that. where you had a family physician. His name is Dr. Mark Shelley. He is a practitioner out of Pennsylvania. He's been practicing for 30 years. And he started an organization called Doctors Against Murderous Obamacare. And he has ever since received overwhelming support and also negative backlash over his move. But what you see in him is a regular doctor who's committed, who has been for the past decades committed to providing care, providing service to his patients, and is being forced to change his conscience because of the economic conditions imposed upon him. Because if he wants to make a living, he has to deny health care. So I'm going to play a little bit of his press conference, which he put out to announce, and it's very widely. It's not. It's being, his press conference and his leaflet, his statement is being very widely covered in a lot of local newspapers across northeastern United States: Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Rhode Island, all the northeastern states. So I'm just going to play a little bit to give people a sense. This one.
As a physician and an American, I feel compelled at this time of peril to address the changes that I see in the process of the actual delivery of health care to the American people. From my perspective as a family practitioner, and from my concern as a citizen, and for my fellow man, I must speak out to explain the dangers that I see in the implementation of American health care today, as exemplified by what is known as Obamacare. What I see being done today is chillingly consistent with the findings and warnings of Dr. Leo Alexander, the chief consultant to the U.S. prosecutors at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal after World War II. In his article entitled Medical Science Under Dictatorship, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine on July 14, 1949, Dr. Alexander made clear what happens to medicine when it, quote, becomes subordinated to the guiding philosophy of a dictatorship, unquote. That dictatorship today is money. Now, to remedy this crisis, we must undertake three important initiatives. Number one, separate the purpose and principle of medicine from a diseased economic system. Restore the essence of the Hippocratic Oath as the philosophical center of the medical profession. The practice of medicine is meant to serve the development of people, not Wall Street and the financial conglomerates, with a population reduction agenda. Hippocrates said, "It's the duty of the physician not only to do that which immediately belongs to him, but likewise to secure the cooperation of the sick, of those who are in attendance, and of all the external agents." Number two, the economic problem. We need to restore the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. If you don't know the Glass-Steagall Act, you need to learn it. Okay, it's the same Wall Street debt bubble, which is crushing the federal government, is crushing the medical profession, as well as the rest of the economy. The only way to liberate ourselves from its destructive effects is to restore the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. Its repeal in 1999 opened the door to the growth of the biggest financial bubble in history. We must separate commercial banking from investment banking and let Wall Street sink under the weight of its own bad investments. No more bailouts or bail-ins for Wall Street. Number three, retire/impeach President Obama. He's repeatedly demonstrated that he is incapable of performing the job for which we hired him. This is not complicated. This is what always happens. When someone fails, we find someone who can do the job better. Multiple legal authorities have already assembled articles for impeachment. This man has failed you and will allow you to die with his inept and undeniably lethal policies that masquerade as health care reform. That sounds strong. It is strong. I wouldn't say that if not for the hard, cold facts that I'm faced with on an everyday basis. It's time for the American people to wake up before it's too late.
But what you're having, ever since then, ever since this really broke the dam, and what it resulted was you had people even like Bill Clinton, who has been for the past so many years been protecting Obama, came out with a very strong leaflet this week bashing Obama, saying you must keep your promise, and I'm telling you personally to reverse the law if necessary, to give people back what they were told that they would get, which is a better health care, a universal health care. And what you had was Obama was forced to come out and apologize and say, well, I give people an extension of a year. Yeah, but that can't happen. The law has already been into effect. The prices have already raised. People have gotten new pensions, new healthcare plans. And you had as soon as that happened, you had, within a day, you had healthcare companies met with Obama, came out with a statement, yeah, well, we're sorry, that's not going to happen. It's already gone into effect. Millions of people have already gotten their healthcare plans, which is impossible to reverse. Plus, the whole Congress is going like, well, where do we come in then? What gives you the authority to tell us we went along with you to pass this law. We went through all the bullshit, and now it's not working. You say, oh, you're going to change it? No, you can't change it. It's the Congress that changes a law, that passes a law, that has the authority to change a law. So it just reflects a complete Nero emperor attitude that, oh, I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it all better. No, you're not. It doesn't work that way. There's a constitution and a law process involved. So what you had yesterday was something pretty major happened that people could not forecast. You're having now many bills being brought forward to change the law by congressmen because Obama's word is not enough. So one of those bills to change that law went on the floor to vote yesterday. It was introduced by Republican Congressman Upton. I don't know where he's from. But, and it's not even a great bill. It's a shitty bill, frankly. But it does, try to amend the fact that, if people like their health care, they can keep the health care. But even if they get another health care, the whole system is designed to fail and to kill people. But that bill resulted in 39 Democrats breaking away and voting with the Republicans on the bill. Many of those Democrats are up for re-elections. Their people are telling them, if you want to vote, if you want to stay in office, you better vote. You better vote with the Upton bill, because we want to change now. People are dying. Hospitals are being shut down. Patients are dying. We're having our organizers being besieged with relatives, with people who are coming out and saying, even now in much more manifold African Americans coming out, especially young African Americans coming out saying, what do I do? How can I participate in changing the policy, in changing the nation? So, and you had even, and Obama has threatened to veto the Upton bill. Where's his promise? Obama has said, if this bill goes ahead, I will cancel it, I will veto it. And one congressman told our organizers in Washington, D.C., that I haven't seen such panic in the House since 9/11. Because these congressmen's phones are ringing off the hook. And that's what the fight is about. Obama is getting his ass handed to him. The administration is completely losing it. And if you look at, that's just the healthcare. That was the only accomplishment of Obama in the past 4 years. And he's lost it. The second thing is, if you look at the war drive, where, especially over Syria, the whole thing is so crazy. People's intentions and people's priorities are so misplaced, where, if we have vague evidence from the same broom closet that Dick Cheney got his evidence at the Pentagon that, Assad is using chemical weapons. So therefore we gotta go bomb Assad. We gotta go invade Syria. But we have concrete proof that the other side, the rebels, like them or not, they are beheading people, in some cases the wrong people. They're killing their enemies and eating their hearts out and posting it on YouTube. But that's fine. That's okay, As long as you're blowing people up to pieces and eating their hearts, that's okay. But if you use chemical weapons, that's the red line. Now you've crossed the red line. So it's just so hypocritical, the whole argument to bomb Syria.
Either lose it
There's no evidence that there even is chemical weapons. You have a really good article in the Politico by Phil Giraldi, who's a CIA, ex-CIA agent. There is no evidence that there is Syria, that Assad used chemical weapons or has chemical weapons. And that's where, you had Russia and China flank Kerry, flank Obama, and say, hey, if the whole issue is about chemical weapons, if that's the basis of you going to war, then why don't we go into Syria and confiscate those chemical weapons? And Assad said, yes, please do. Please come in with your investigators and go through all my stockpiles and find out if you get any proof of that. And the result was none. The result was absolutely none. The war drive was halted. The result was that the Saudis freaked out, where you had Prince Turki bin Faisal, who is Bandar's brother, came out in the press openly attacking the US military for not going along with Obama, for not going along with the Saudis, attacking General Dempsey by name, the one person who has the whole time stood up to Obama, who is the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, which is the highest ranking army. I mean, this guy is the head of the United States Armed Forces. So, and then what you had, what you have is also a really good article in the Politico, which is a new publication being started in Washington, D.C., and as one of it has a newspaper edition and a print edition too. Thanks. No, I don't actually. Okay, so this Politico magazine in its What are you doing?
I just don't like the cracking up.
Okay. So one of its main articles in its in its first editorial was a really good article called Obama versus the Generals. And what you have is this lady, Rosa Brooks, I think that's her name, write up an article where she interviews many of the leading Pentagon and Army officials in Washington, D.C., asking them, who is it in the military that Obama's close to, that Obama listens to? Franklin Roosevelt had his close aides, like Douglas MacArthur, who also was advising the Kennedys. So who does Obama go to when he has questions? And the unanimous reaction from all these people in the military was a long silence and then saying, none, nobody. In fact, one of the military professionals said, Obama prefers the military to be seen, not heard. Obama doesn't, he and his cabinet never listened to the military. They've never approached the military for any advice. And but that's a really good Politico article. And then you had recently, just 2 days ago, the FBI director, James Comey, came out saying, he was asked, are you okay with the fact if the Benghazi survivors and witnesses testify in the Congress? Because till date, the White House has not let them testify to the Congress. In many cases, their identities have been changed. They've been put into witness protection programs, and the Congress can't find them. If you want to create a legal case, if you want to open a prosecution, you can't do it because these people they don't exist anymore on U.S. data. But if the FBI director said, absolutely, I would not have a problem with them testifying. In fact, that's probably a good idea. Completely breaking away from Obama and the White House. And of course, there's much more. There's a whole fiasco also over the Iran peace talks, which Israel hates, but are still continuing given the pressure of Russia, China, and India, who want to work together, which I'll get to later. And if you look, so that's the military, and that's the intelligence, and what you've had also since people like Edward Snowden is more people coming out. And that's what LaRouche had said a month ago, that there will be more Snowdens coming out. Because he has, in himself, and not so much as what he has done, is because he has invoked a certain American spirit in the population, he will, by that nature, force a lot of people to come out and assert the Constitution, which will make the Constitution live again, which will make Obama impeachable. Because I just recently came back from organizing in the United States, in Texas, and to most people, the Constitution is dead. Nobody follows it. Everybody's ripping it apart. But that's where people like Snowden, average citizens, who called their Congress and said, you must stop the healthcare bill, you must stop the war in Syria. When people assert their rights, their sovereign rights, the Constitution lives in every nation. And what you had is more CIA agents come out and testify. There was this big article in New York Times where these two CIA agents came out and said, the CIA is involved in collecting much more data than the NSA. Now, we've known that forever. People who say that are often called, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You think you're being watched. But that's really what's going on. That's a big problem. So the problem is, well, these are problems, but so there are solutions, which is the fight right now with Glass-Steagall, which is the fact that LaRouche has made the case that with the administration sinking, the rats are jumping ship. And now is the time we push for Glass-Steagall. The result was LaRouche wrote this paper called Worse Than Weimar, the present hyperinflationary crisis. And this was distributed en masse in Washington, D.C., where you had congressmen coming up to our organizers saying, what does LaRouche have to say today? What does Lyndon have to say today? Because the leaflet itself goes through the fact that unless the American population and the congressmen don't kick Obama out and replace him with a Glass-Steagall banking system, there is no chance in hell we're going to survive, or the world is going to survive. So this paper, everybody should read. It's not that long, but the case is that right now you're having a strong push in Washington, D.C. as to who's going to take on Wall Street, who's going to stand up for the American people. An important figure who's doing that is us and Elizabeth Warren, who's a senator from Massachusetts, who has brought forward a bill on Glass-Steagall. And she has been relentlessly attacking Wall Street banks. Like she gave a speech at the Roosevelt Institute, of all the places, 2 days ago, and she basically said that David beat Goliath with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which she began to protect consumers from bank fraud. And she said, we can do it again. David can beat Goliath again with Glass-Steagall. It is possible. We can do it. So you're having congressmen saying, I have a bill in the House, I have a bill in the Senate, there's a bill in the House, we can do it. So when the population says, oh, it'll never happen, no. It is happening. You're having a fight in the Congress where people are fighting for it. You have these senators who are fighting for it. They're not perfect. They have problems. But we have brought together, like if you look at the sponsors of Glass-Steagall, it's Elizabeth Warren, who's a liberal Democrat, and it's John McCain, who has really serious mental issues of bombing the world. And even in the House, you've got a bipartisan bill. You have Walter Jones, who's an excellent congressman from North Carolina, and then you have the other co-sponsor is Marcy Kaptur, who's a Democrat, liberal Democrat from Ohio. The point is, Glass-Steagall is breaking party lines, and we now have a huge fight in the United States and internationally, where now there's a move in Italy, Sweden, all over the world, other nations also, Iceland, Britain has a Glass-Steagall bill introduced last year. So the whole thing is really moving very fast. But why Glass-Steagall? And because you're having the world dynamic is changing very rapidly, where you're having the rest of the world is realizing the fact that the United States and Europe is under not just a bad economic system, that the United States and Europe is under an oligarchy. They are under an empire, which frankly much of these nations be. That's the external affair, like foreign ministers of Russia, India, and China. And what you had for the past few years is our movement organizing these leaders, organizing in Russia, China, India, to forge an alliance, not just for economic progress, but also for taking the responsibility for civilization, to bring the United States, bring the rest of the world out of the crisis. And what you had very recently is a huge breakthrough in China, where the Chinese president came out calling for a Silk Road development, calling out that China is going to launch an international economic corridor project where we are going to revive the ancient economic corridor between China and Eastern Europe, which would mean developing the regions through it. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, all these poor, backward regions where you're lucky if you're above 30 years old, because that's the life expectancy. So China's only doing it to steal the profits. What's there to steal? It's nothing. It's a barren desert. There's no people to enslave. There's nothing to steal. There's no food. So people have to look bigger at it. They have to change their perspective. Now this whole Silk Road thing, it's not, oh, where did this come from? This is something we have fought for since 1970s, where Helga Zepp LaRouche, she's LaRouche's wife, she's a leading civil rights and political activist in Europe for many decades now. She is the first one who proposed to China, who went to China, gave conferences, and is still doing that, organizing the Chinese leadership on reviving their cultural heritage of a Silk Road, of reviving the Confucian legacy of developing their people on a higher basis, not just enslaving them to make Walmart products, but for higher technological progress. So this is something not out of the blue, but this is happening right now, where you're having these nations are allying with each other on major projects, on major military exercises, on major projects like fusion. Like India last week finally commissioned to start an indigenous fusion reactor in the western part of India. That's big. For a country where 80% of the population is below poverty level, to have the bold effort to, we are already on a Mars mission, and now to go with fusion takes a lot of courage in a world where of the bullshit we're living in. But India, China, and Russia know that this is necessary. These are not nice projects, but this is a war avoidance measure. This is how you bring the world out of the chaos it's in. So, and that's what the fight is. That, right now under Obama's quote-unquote leadership, the United States is going to blow itself up. And we're at a position where, if we had gone into Syria, the United States and Russia would have started a world war. We were very close to World War III, and people should realize that. We've been very close to blowing each other up, but it's always been pulled back by some very brave people like John F. Kennedy and people right now in the United States institutions. And that's what we're organizing for, is that, with developing the Silk Road, with developing this whole region, this whole Bering Strait region, a Bering Strait tunnel bridging Russia, United States, and Canada in an economic paradigm, in an economic agreement, would fundamentally change the world. And frankly, that's the only valid argument. The only valid argument Russia and United States should have is whether there's going to be a tunnel under the Bering Strait, or is there going to be a bridge? Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that we should argue about. There's really no other basis, no other argument that is valid right now. Mm-hmm. Whether it should be bomb Syria or Iran. No. What are you doing for your population, which is right now going hungry? And this is something that, it's not, before I go more into solutions or my class, the point is, what kind of culture do you need to create a solution? Because it's not that we're lacking bad ideas and somebody has a good idea and it's going to be done. You're having a culture that is refusing to think about good idea. And it's in people's faces, but they refuse to see it or adopt it. They're like, no, that's never going to happen. You're too idealistic. That's never going to happen. And that's the point, that how do you bring people to a higher sense of identity? That if you want to save civilization, it's not going to be survival. It's not going to be, if everybody just takes care of himself and does good things, isn't that going to make the world a better place? No, that's not what's going to change. That has never changed the world. If you look through history, like I'll show an example today, the way the world has changed for the better or for the worse is by a few people wanting to change that. Even for the worse, it's always been a few people with a driving passion to make world a hateful, shitty place. People like Bertrand Russell, people like Palmerston, people like the British Empire. And similarly for the good, it's required a dedication by very few people in every nation to make it a better place. Now, the point is, how do you create sympathy in people? And look at the world right now. You're having problems. That should be your problem. People don't cringe when you tell them. 9,000 people in sub-Sahara desert die every day from starvation. 250,000 children in India die every year just because they don't have soap. There's no soap, that's it. So what's the solution? You give everybody soap? No, you increase the standard as a whole. You improve the culture as a whole. Now how do you do that? And how do you make it your mission to do that, because that pisses you off, that's not happening. Now that's why the United States was respected in the world. In the past, under Kennedy, under Roosevelt, under Lincoln, or even under James Monroe. Was that not because we were great and powerful, but because America had that compassion to protect the world and to save it from imperialism. Like under James Monroe, you had John Quincy Adams, his Secretary of Treasury, draft the Monroe Doctrine. What was that? Well, that was something that the South America would be protected by the United States from British Empire. That the British would not make slaves of the American people, of the South American people, and that America would work with these nations in Peru, Chile, Brazil on economic progress. And that was attacked heavily in the British Parliament. But that's the legacy which has saved the world. That's the American legacy. That's the legacy which is going to force the United States to build the Bering Strait, or build Nawapa, or pass Glass-Steagall right now. With that, now that American spirit is not something new. That American spirit, which was fought for in the American War of Independence, came through Europe, came through a fight in Europe. And one of the best examples, one of the precursors of that fighting spirit against an oligarchy is my class, which is, which is the Treaty of Westphalia. Yeah. I'm just going to refill my water. Beginning class.
Oh, that's me too.
Cold water. Okay. Now, and that's something we represent. One of the things I wanted to bring up, which I forgot because it was too tiny, before my class, is our movement in New York. We have a local in New York and New Jersey, among other places in the United States. We intervened, I think, yesterday or day before at an event in New York University, where there was a professor who gave a presentation on Kennedy's assassination. And I think he's written a book on the Warren Commission. His whole presentation was that the Warren Commission is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. Anybody who says something's wrong with it is a conspiracy theorist, and you should not trust them because they're crazy. And he's a lecturer in that university, and he's given, his students were all like, yeah, exactly, you're right, because he had really brainwashed the population. And so...
Sorry, who is this guy?
I don't know. I can find it out. But I heard Daniel Burke go through it. And then, he said, oh, are there any questions? Are there any conspiracy theorists in the audience, who think I'm lying? So, his daughter asked a question, his son asked a question, another student asked a question, which was totally well scripted and everything. And then he said that, now students, remember what we've learned in class is that there's truth, but there are different kinds of truths. There are three kinds of truths, he said. The first is empirical truth, which is by data. The second is is emotional truth. Through you feel it, and therefore it's right because you feel it. The third is truth by authority. So immediately any higher conception of truth is removed. That's how you brainwash university students. That's how these professors do it. And then we brought up the question, the higher truth, which is that there's a truth above these truths. If you want to understand Kennedy's assassination, where we asked the question, okay, if Kennedy was killed and you say it was just a lone assassin, then tell me, why is it that only good presidents get killed? Why do assholes never get killed? Why do good presidents get killed? Why does Kennedy get killed? Lincoln get killed? McKinley get killed? Garfield get killed? And these are all people who challenge the oligarchy, who challenge the status quo, the way the world is, and want to change it. Why did they get killed? Obama doesn't get killed. Nixon didn't get killed. Truman didn't get killed. So that's the higher truth where that's how you force people into reality. And the surprising thing was a lot of students got it. Some good students got it. They took our leaflets. They wanted to stay in touch. So it's not hard to change people's opinion, but you've got to have the courage to stand up and say no. So that was good. That's what we do. That's our role as an organization, where that's what LaRouche is brilliant at, because the way you change truth is it's not the numbers. It's not going into the streets and chanting Glass-Steagall that's going to change the world. The way you want to change the system is becoming the leadership that you are missing, that you hope for. Becoming the next Kennedy, taking on his mission. Now my class is going to go through a period in history which was very important in changing the world. It's called the Treaty of Westphalia. And what you had in Europe was a period where for about 100 years in Europe, Germany, France, Western Europe, you had crazy continuous wars for no good reason. I mean, people think, in the United States, if you go, there's always been, chaos between races, whites versus blacks, or Hispanic immigrants, or Muslims versus Christians. Well, look at Europe. They're all white. They're all Christians. What are they fighting for? The point is that the oligarchy will always find a way to divide people over the stupidest things. And that's what you had, where you had Puritans or Lutherans or Catholics just massacring each other. The result was you had, in some cases, in some villages, you had no men. You had absolutely no men. You only had women or babies, baby children as future men. And in many parts of Germany and Austria, you had the population was reduced by 50%. And in many cases, it took about 100 years to bring it back to its original level. 50 to 100 years. If you look at that, the green, the light green and the dark green is 20 to 40% of the people lost. The purple is 50%, population lost. And over 50, the red areas are more than 50% of the people lost. Not just through wars, but when everybody's fighting wars, there are no doctors, there's nobody to grow food, people are starving, there's nobody to build cities, to maintain civilization. And that's when, and finally you had, now if you look in universities, they say that the Treaty of Westphalia, the Peace of Westphalia is also called as the Peace of Exhaustion. That people just got tired of fighting and they said, okay, we're giving it up. Let's just figure a way to live with each other. That's what it's taught. But that's not what happened. Or else it wouldn't have lasted 100 years. Because this had been going on for quite a while and would have gone on if you did not have people like Cusa and people like Mazarin on the left and Colbert on the right. Now, who was Cusa first? He is perhaps the first scientist. Like, this guy is the precursor to the Renaissance, to people like Da Vinci, Kepler, other people in Italian and European Renaissance. It's him. It's Nicholas of Cusa, who was an Austrian priest, but he challenged the church at that time. the scientific thinking at that time by saying that man is created in the image of God, and it doesn't mean man has superpowers. Just because Jesus can walk on water doesn't mean we can walk on water. But man is created in the image of God through the mind. Because we can participate in the creation, in God's creation, through our thinking. And what he's the first guy who wrote books, and his books are one of the most profound books you'll ever read, which are things like, on learned ignorance and so forth. But his treaties, which he wrote these books to organize, like these books were spread all over Europe. You had intellectuals reading them, you had people discussing them, and that's what resulted in Westphalia and then the American independence. But his books were the first foundation of creating a civilization without the divine rights of king. Because that's what he challenged, was the divine right of kings, which I read it in school, I'm sure you guys must have read it too, which is the idea at that time, but still is, which is the British monarchy, is that why are you a king and I am not? Because God has ordained us as kings. God has put us there. We have a right to be king, a divine right to be king. And that's what Cusa challenged when he said, no, every man is created in the image of God, including a king, including a slave, including a leper. And although there are some people who, it's not like everybody's equal, because some people are weak, some people are handicapped, but we're all equal in spirit, in our mind's capability. And anyways, he died in 1400s, but what he resulted in, his prodigy, his thinking resulted in a lot of people like Mazarin, who was also a cardinal. He was part of the church. And he was working, he was like a tutor of the future French king, Louis XIV, who's the guy at the bottom. And Mazarin basically, tutored him and finally became an advisor to Louis XIV, who had serious problems. I mean, this guy was flamboyant, he was into pleasure, he was like, what, must we take on the burden of saving the world? Why can't I just have fun? And Mazarin said, no, you have to do it, or there is no fun. We're all going to get killed. So he went along with it. And but one of the most important people was Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And there's a whole class that can be given on this guy, but I'm going to keep it very concise. Because Colbert was a protege of Mazarin and finally became a very close aide of Louis XIV, even became what you would call today a finance minister. He became the finance minister, foreign minister, secretary of war, secretary of state. Like all those similar positions he held for a very long time. And what he did and Mazarin did is that, okay, we got to save Europe. We got to figure a way out to stop the killing and the murder. And what they did was they forced this, they created, communications and intellectual circles all over Germany, Austria, Europe. They started talking to people. Hey, are you interested in having an alliance which is not based on killing each other, which is based on things like economic cooperation? We've got flour in our region, we've got corn. We can figure a way to build ties to have a better future. And you had a communications built up. Now, what these guys forced was at that time to force these small regions to look at Europe as a whole. Because you won't believe, people didn't even know what Europe looked like back then. Like it was only after Colbert had formed the Royal Academy of Sciences, which I'll come back to, it was only after that finally the idea of a longitude was figured out. And the Cassini maps were figured out. Like Cassini was a member of the Royal Academy of Sciences in France under Colbert. Before that, people had no idea, like a map of Europe, forget it. They had no conception of what the world is. Just like today, people have no conception of a solar system or a galaxy. So that's what Colbert and Mazarin did, where they started charting out Europe. They started charting out, okay, what can be done along the Vistula, or the Elbe, or the Danube, or the Rhine, especially the Rhine. But before I come back to that, I want to go into the Treaty of Westphalia itself. Now, the treaty was signed in 1648, but it wasn't like it was a one-month job or something. They had to organize for a decade or more for that. And in a time where you don't have mass communication. So you're writing a letter, sending it to somebody, it takes a month to reach that place, and they write a letter, and then it takes another month for you to get the letter back, and in the middle your horse may pass out or your guy may get shot or something. So it's a complicated, long process, but they figured it out, and finally in 1648 there was a treaty signed by most of the opposing parties. Matt, want to read?
Oh yeah. The Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, bringing an end to the 30 Years' War, which had drawn Europe in blood in battles over religion, defined the principles of sovereignty and equality in numerous subcontracts, and in this way became the constitution of the new system of states in Europe. We quote the two key principles. Article 1 begins, a Christian general and permanent peace, and true and honest friendship, must rule between the Holy Imperial Majesty and the Holy All-Christian Majesty, as well as between all and every ally and follower of the mentioned Imperial Majesty, the House of Austria, and successors. And this peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other. A faithful neighborliness should be renewed and flourish for peace and friendship, and flourish again. Peace among sovereign nations requires, in other words, according to this principle, that each nation develops itself fully and regards it as its self-interest to develop the others fully, and vice versa. A real family of nations.
Right. So that's what this treaty, it's not just a treaty, it's a different way of thinking introduced, was the advantage of the other. That your advantage lies in advantage of the other. Because you're better off when your neighbors are educated. You're not better off living in a neighborhood of gangsters. Your advantage does lie in a healthy neighborhood. And your advantage lies in furthering that advantage of making sure that you continue to live in a healthy environment, that your neighbors continue to live in that environment. And so this forced a lot of people, because by that time, through Mazarin's organizing of Cusa and of intellectual works of Plato and other things, some people had started adopting that ideology. Some people had started really thinking that, okay, enough of this me. We really have to figure a way to think about the whole thing before me, which is hard to do, which I'll show later. Go on.
Article 2. On both sides, all should be forever forgotten and forgiven. What has from the beginning of the unrest, no matter how or where, from one side or the other, happened in terms of hostility, so that neither because of that nor for any other reason or pretext should anyone commit or allow to happen any hostility, unfriendliness, difficulty, or obstacle in respect to persons, their status, goods, or security itself, or through others, secretly or openly, directly or indirectly, under the pretense of the authority of the law, or by way of violence within the kingdom, or anywhere outside of it, and any earlier contradictory treaties should not stand against this. Instead, the fact that each and every one, from one side and the other, both before and during the war, committed insults, violent acts, hostilities, damages, and injuries, without regard of persons or outcomes, should be completely put aside, so that everything, whatever one could demand from another under his name, will be forgotten to eternity.
Right, so this is really important because this will come back later, the idea of the past not governing the future, of forgiveness, because the world is not fixed, the world is changing, the universe is changing. So you cannot hold on to certain axioms if they're going to lead to your collapse. So this idea of forgiving your enemy. And that's like India and China. I'm from India, and India and China have had terrible relations. We've had wars together. China invaded India 40 years ago. But we know that right now we can't let our past govern the future, because we live in a world that's run by an oligarchy whose intention is to kill the third world countries. The other thing that the Peace of Westphalia brought about is this idea of raison d'être, the reason of existence. Why do you exist? That's what Mazarin's idea was, that before we get to any treaties or anything, why is it that we exist? Why is your culture important to you? Why are your people? Why do you exist? If your whole state, if your whole nation, culture gets wiped out tomorrow, would the world lose anything? That forced a lot of these leaders, a lot of these regions, to understand that there's a reason to humanity's existence. And we must exist. We must fight for that reason. Or if we don't have a reason, we must find a reason why we exist in the world, why we are important to the world. What do you contribute to humanity? That's what you should ask a Wall Street banker next time. What do you contribute to humanity? What do you really do? What's your reason of existence? And that's what gets fundamentally somebody to change his identity. If you walk downtown St. Catherine, forcing somebody to adopt a higher identity. What's your reason of existence?
What the French Canadian can do to the English Canadian and what Canada can do to the world.
Yeah. So if you cease to exist tomorrow, will the world have lost anything? So that's something that's very important for people to think and ultimately shape the identity of these leaders. And that was very important because right now, ever since then, you had, because they were up against an empire, which is very deadly, whose only argument is to kill you off. Kennedy, Lincoln, we don't like you, we'll kill you. So it took a lot of guts for these people, for these leaders, and even today for Russia, China, and India to stand up and say no to Syria, no to environmentalists, no to Kyoto, no to these stupid ideologies. Now back to Westphalia. Now at that time, the main focus of Mazarin and Colbert was the river Rhine, was this river, which was the major reason for many wars, because the French basically considered Rhine their property. They said, this is something given to us by God, this defines the French culture's boundary, we're not going to let it go, and we're going to tax the shit out of you if you want to use it. So that's something that Colbert changed, because Colbert and Mazarin basically said, the Peace of Westphalia was that we're going to unite these regions together, and we, the French, are going to be the guardians. We're going to guard the treaty. We're going to make sure this works out. And our intention is not to become the next empire, because the Habsburg Empire, the Venetian Empire, was falling. They were losing control over these regions, because these regions were getting pissed of being sent to wars. And they were not going to go along with the Treaty of Westphalia if they knew the French want to become the next empire. And that's why Colbert and Mazarin they organized even their own region, their own people, that look, we must free the Rhine. We must free the Rhine, and actually that's in the benefit of everybody. So what resulted was, enough of free trade. We're going to go for fair trade. We're going to bring all of Europe into using the Rhine to better their regions. So, Meredith, do you want to read this?
Sure. Fair trade on Europe's rivers. In 1642, Mazarin summoned his negotiators at Munster to announce and circulate everywhere that the precondition to the peace negotiations was to forbid the creation of new tolls along the Rhine River. The proposition was written as follows: from this day forward, along the two banks of the Rhine River and from the adjacent provinces, commerce and transport of goods shall be free of transit for all of the inhabitants, and it will no longer be permitted to impose on the Rhine any new toll, open birthright, customs, or taxation of any denomination and of any sort whatsoever. The fact that the injunction included the mention "and from adjacent provinces" proposed to bring fair trade and economic expansion deeper into the heart of Germany.
Okay, so this was really important because throughout the Rhine you had, of course, these little kingdoms and these little dukes and princes who would charge people if they were going through their part of the Rhine. And that's what Mazarin said, no, you can't do that anymore. We're sorry. This is for everybody, and you can participate in it. But this was really important because the whole of Colbert's reforms, which you'll see more of these, Because what's the idea, what was the idea before Westphalia? The same idea today, of profit. If you want to make money, you got to steal it. It's going to come from somewhere, right? Somebody's got to get poor if you want to make money. But that's what Mazarin changed. That's what the idea was of developing the region, is that there is a way. That's what fair trade was. It's not free trade. It's not buy cheap and sell dear. It's not stealing from someone if you want to make money. You have to change the physical, economic conditions of the whole region. You've got to improve the people, the skilled labor of your population if you want to make a profit, real profit. And it's possible for everybody to make a profit. It's possible to have wealthy, well-fed citizens of your region if you go along with fair trade policies of Colbert. And Colbertism is something which is still hated in London School of Economics and other business schools. The idea of, dirigism it's called, or Colbert capitalism, whatever. This concept is hated because, again, the concept today is, you want to make money, you got to steal it from somewhere. That's how Wall Street makes money. That's how any money is made today. And then you had Colbert, okay, so we've opened the Rhine, we've opened the Danube, we're going to bring these regions together, they're going to start shipping their goods to each other. Good. Now, we're going to use those raw materials and improve those raw materials, which is the Industrial Commonwealth policy, which was a big reform. So this is like the TDA. It's like, laying foundations for future projects. Who wants to read it? Jean-Philippe?
The Industrial Commonwealth Policy. Colbert's industrial protectionist system is generally known for four major reforms that marked the beginnings of the modern industrial nation-state. First, he organized and funded a system of industrial corporations and infrastructure projects that provided job security for all types of skilled and non-skilled labor, that is, workers of all types of arts et métiers. Second, he established protectionist measures for all standardized French clothing products, such that no dumping of foreign goods was allowed in France, except at very high cost. Colbertism became synonymous with protectionism. Third, he funded and supported population growth, considering that war and ignorance were the two main causes of population reduction. He believed that the government had to take care of its poor, that its role was to foster the increase of the population density of the nation. And fourth, he accompanied industrial measures with the reform of civil justice that became the first civil code of France, lasting 130 years until it was destroyed by the imperialist code of Napoleon at the turn of the 18th century.
Right. So the idea, under Colbert, people would be paid if you have babies. If you have more than 10 babies, you get a pension of £1,000 a year. That's a lot of money. But it wasn't just, increasing the people, because the idea was increasing the skilled labor. That you want more people, but you want more skilled people. You want more people involved in machine tool, in figuring out steel mining or coal mining or other forms of valuable merchants at that time. And then the second idea of, making sure that your native population is self-sufficient in food and in basic industrial measures. So you're setting protectionist measures. You're gonna discourage foreign goods, certain foreign goods, because you want your own economy to produce those goods, like food, water, basic cotton, and other raw materials that the population generally needs. So this was very important. And then the civil justice reform, we'll get to that in a minute or two. And, this is also pretty interesting. Anyone want to read?
Yeah. During the 1660s, there persisted a 3-century-old privilege that dated back to the shameful 1358 Edict of Charles V that stated that the laws of commerce are made to profit and favor each craft rather than the common good. Colbert turned this on its head, instituting his first edict on April 8, 1666, which was made to secure all the manufactures and factories of the kingdom for the benefit of the common good. From that day on, Colbert wrote hundreds of measures and regulations until the entire Garden of France began to bloom again after the devastation of the religious wars.
Right, because Colbert really organized the French nobility, the leaders of France, that you've got to think of the whole country as a farm. So what's good for the whole farm is what's good for the sheep and the cows and the other areas. You cannot make laws pertaining to, okay, if you want to improve one part of the economy, you got to destroy some other part. If you want to improve the service sector, you got to destroy some other sector. Colbert said, no, any future law which is to be made has to be made for the common good, for the whole industry. So which would mean like an overhaul of reform. And I mean, and what you're changing basically would be a 300-old law. So bringing back Glass-Steagall is not, oh, we're putting us back 70 years. That was like so way back. Oh, really? Well, Colbert turned back a 300-year-old law. He said, no, that's stupid. We're going to change it. And it worked. And one of the biggest things, because Colbert wasn't very much liked. There were scandals, people were gossiping, oh, he's too extreme. Like just what they say about LaRouche. Colbert, oh, he's too much of an idealist. He's not going to last long. And the people liked what he's doing, but they weren't confident. They're like, oh, things are going to go shitty again. Because you can never take down the nobility. You can never take down these rich. You can never take their money. You're never going to change their money. You're always going to be poor. But so he had to really fight to win people's trust. So one of the biggest things he did was the Fouquet affair. We're gonna now clean out the system. Which was, okay. Well, why don't you read it first? Jean-Philippe, want to read it?
Colbert's reform of justice, most famous example of abuse of public trust during that period, was known as the Fouquet affair, the scandalous case of the superintendent of the finances of King Louis XIV. In November of 1661, Colbert forced Nicolas Fouquet to be brought before the tribunal for having stolen an immense fortune in different public offices and from the treasury of the king. In 1661, the government brought him to trial, where he was found guilty of massive embezzlement. All of his goods were confiscated. He was condemned to exile and then later imprisoned for life in the fortress of Pignerol.
So this is the finance minister of France. Because at that time you had the tradition of buying public offices. The king didn't appoint anyone. The rich nobility could buy public office. That's the only way to fill a public office. There was a common thing that was said that, oh, every time the king creates a new office, some new idiot comes up to buy it. But the idea was, people said, well, you can't target these people because they're giving money to serve the people. They're giving money to serve the king. So why would they embezzle? That's what these people would say. Why would we steal? Like J.P. Morgan. Mm-hmm. Me? Steal? Of course not. What a horrible thing to say. Like this banker gave an interview a month ago, and he said, blaming Wall Street CEOs is like lynching in the South, lynching Negroes in the South. Like he compared, when people say attack us, that's like lynching. I mean, it was bad. So that's what you had back then, with this rich nobility. It was an abomination to think that they are corrupt, because they're giving money, their own money, their hard-earned money, to serve people. So why would they steal?
Right.
But Colbert exposed it.
It's like J.P. Morgan paying interest.
Right.
But they manage our money. Why would they steal it from us?
Yeah.
If no one would trust them, right?
Right? Exactly.
Sure, logically that makes sense,
Right.
but that's not.
But that's what it was. So, the king, Louis XIV, is having dinner with this guy Fouquet, and a week later, Fouquet's in jail. And it's all Colbert. It's not the king. It's Colbert. And what he did it's not just going to be Fouquet. It's going to be everyone. So what was launched under Colbert was like the Pecora Commission. Who does not know what the Pecora Commission is? Okay. All right. Ferdinand Pecora was an Italian immigrant. But under Roosevelt, when Franklin Roosevelt came into office, into presidency in 1933 in the United States, he launched a major investigation into the Great Depression. Was it just bad decisions made, or was there an intention to steal and loot people? Was there an intention to create the Depression? So one of the people, you had many people put in charge of of finding out what's going on. They all did a bad job. They were fired, until Roosevelt finally brought in this guy, Ferdinand Pecora, a poor New York child of immigrants. But what Ferdinand Pecora put together was the Pecora Commission, was an investigative finding that yes, J.P. Morgan, the Brown brothers, all these bankers willfully stole from the people. And he proved it. He was threatened. His family was threatened. I mean, their books. He wrote a book. He wrote a really good book. I forget the name, but it's very popular. But this guy became a hero, and because of his work, Glass-Steagall was passed. Because even before then, I think it was Senator Glass who was not for a financial reform. But when Pecora exposed it under Franklin Roosevelt's blessings, Glass was convinced, okay, we need to do something. So this was a coup d'etat against the oligarchy, which is what the Pecora Commission was, which is what Colbert did. Who wants to read it? Somebody in here.
Okay, I'll read. A coup d'etat against the oligarchy, Colbert's Pecora Commission. In March of 1661, the 23-year-old King Louis XIV replaced Nicolas Fouquet with Colbert as the superintendent of the finances. After the scandalous trial of Fouquet was over, Colbert became a popular hero and was given the green light for the creation of a chamber of justice. In all, 27 judges were commissioned by Colbert to clean up the biggest financial mess the nation had ever seen. The reforms were so sweeping that, in only a few years, a total of £419 million was recovered from the income of venal offices. And no fewer than 40,000 noble families were affected by this axiomatic change.
Wow.
All of those funds were then invested in Colbert's program of development of new industries.
Right. So this was done. This was done in the Colbert. This is the extent. Now, it wasn't just about, it wasn't just, we need to, it was much more than that. The idea of Colbert was much more sublime. That what's really gonna, once you get rid of the nobility, what kind of leadership do you need? Because you still need leadership. You still need somebody making decisions. You can't have a pure democracy. You still need a certain leadership in society. And that's why he organized Louis XIV that you've got to be the emperor that's into cool things like science and technology, and because the king had to be really organized. He was a young guy, so he still wanted to party, he still wanted to do fun things, so Colbert and Mazarin had to really organize him, which resulted in France starting the Royal Academy of Sciences, which was the first of its kind, which is what Leibniz did later in, about 50 to 100 years later, in Moscow, in Berlin, and other parts of Europe. But the Royal Academy of Sciences was, who wants to read? David?
I can read it. This was not just another academic teaching institution, but rather a research center for scientific and technological development that had the mission of creating innovations in specific areas of scientific activities to improve economic development in the fields of astronomy, chemistry, optical physics, geometry, geography, industrial engineering, canal building, agriculture, and navigation. Each area was to be orientated towards technological advances through the application of new discoveries of physical principles. This Colbertian Academy of Sciences became the model institution from which Gottfried Leibniz later created his academies in Berlin and St. Petersburg.
Right. And on the right is a beautiful painting, I think it's in the Louvre, of all these scientists thanking Louis XIV for creating the academy. And the academy, the building itself was marvelous. That's a painting of the building being formed. I mean, this was a beautiful sculpture based on Greek geometry, and to inspire people to make discoveries. And the kind of population that was invited to the Academy of Sciences were from all over Europe. people like, Christian Huygens on the right, Blaise Pascal, Ole Romer, on the bottom. He's the guy who discovered the speed of light. And Pierre Fermat, who was actually the mentor and a very close collaborator of Colbert. And other people like Leibniz, I should have put Leibniz's picture up there, most important.
The building still exists?
No, the building doesn't exist. I think it was wiped out in a war or something, but 100, 200 years later, it's blown up or something, intentionally. But it was a beautiful structure, trust me. Take my word for it. But the breakthroughs made in this institution were amazing. Like I said before, the Cassini maps. Like Cassini was a young guy, was brought in, and he developed the idea of a longitude. There's a way you can navigate the world on longitude. So maps were made. Navigation, speed of light was discovered. Leibniz taught and learned in the institution. So you had these giant minds, making breakthroughs, and at the same time applying it into the industrial sector. I mean, the amount of canal building France did, not only in France but all over Europe, on the Rhine, on the Danube, it's never been done ever since. The scale hasn't been done, which is what would be done again if you start the Silk Road and all those projects that right now we're fighting for. So, and the British were pissed. The Venetians were pissed. The Dutch were pissed at what's going on. Where, the ocean, where the British would say, well, because at that time the Anglo-Dutch company was still owning the oceans. They were pretty much the pirates. Like, you have Wall Street today that, monopolizing the whole economy. Small banks really don't stand a chance. So these nations, these France, Germany, other regions couldn't really send ships to each other without paying high taxes to Britain, which was absurd, because the right to that, we own the sea, we own the oceans. That's like, United States saying, if you gotta go to the moon, you gotta pay us tax because we were there first. We own all the space between Earth and Mars, that's us, so you gotta pay us a tax. And Obama might do it, I don't put it past him. But
this is a great argument against the native Indians who are saying, this is my land.
Right. How so?
Okay, so what is the land? What is the property? So that if the American can say the moon is mine,
right.
Because I stepped first here, that's mine.
Yeah, well, that's the idea of, Westphalia is the advantage of the other. Your advantage lies in the advantage of the other. But that's what Colbert said. Colbert said, no, absolutely not. We're not going to do that. We're not going to pay you taxes. We can trade fairly with each other. And it all came down to so silly things that the British said, well, at least what we demand is that when our ships come into your harbor, you should salute us. You should salute the British ships. And it was because that's ideological. They really think they're a different species, And this idea, this letter is a good thing because Colbert had a younger brother, Charles Colbert, who was also very much involved with his elder brother in forming policies. So Charles would be the ambassador to all these nations, whereas Colbert held the primary position.
What was Colbert's first name?
Jean-Baptiste.
Jean-Baptiste.
So this is a letter he wrote to Charles. Kristen, you want to read it?
As for the ocean is concerned, even though they, the British, are the more powerful, we have not until now come to the view that their pretended sovereignty has been recognized. Therefore, it pertains to the common good of the two nations and of the interests of the two kings to establish this parity in all of the seas. As for the Treaty on Commerce, the ideas of Lord Arlington are very reasonable, since they tend to establish a reciprocal treatment between the two kingdoms.
So this gives you an idea. We don't accept the British idea that they have their pretended sovereignty. We don't buy that. Now that's what, sadly, it didn't last very long. Westphalia was an important experiment. It lasted many decades, but it ultimately got destroyed because the population caved in to what's good for me is my pleasure. And, people like Colbert and Mazarin had to really fight these guys that, no, you must think of the bigger picture. And even things like This is important. No, so this was something, but the seeds were planted, which is what's important. That now humanity had an example that this does work. This can be sustained. And this is what was realized later, because the fight was continued through people like Leibniz, through his circles, through these scientists like Christian Huygens, other people, and the fight was continued into the American Revolution through circles of Benjamin Franklin, through circles of the Mathers, the Winthrops, which ultimately led United States on the, a Westphalia-like sovereign nation on the other side of the Atlantic. That, okay, if it didn't work in Europe, we're still going to try it. We're still going to fight for it. And that's, now, the problem is today this idea of Westphalia, this idea of a country, of a sovereignty, the idea that the population finding its own leadership to chart its own future, it's lost. People don't understand it. University students don't understand it. Because it's considered, this is not taught in university. Westphalia is taught as exhaustion, peace of exhaustion, which is bullshit. You don't build canals, you don't start Royal Academy of Sciences through exhaustion. This was all an intention to change people's identity to be better. So, now you've got people like George Soros, for example, who thinks, who wants to read? Hassan, you want to read it?
Sovereignty is an anachronistic concept originating in bygone times when society consisted of rulers and subjects, not citizens. It became the cornerstone of international relations with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The rulers of a sovereign state have a responsibility to protect the state's citizens. When they fail to do so, the responsibility is transferred to the international community.
Right. So it's so stupid, because that's not what Westphalia was about. It wasn't of rulers and subjects. It was all about citizens. It's about denying, it's about not accepting this divine right of kings. It's about Westphalia was about putting the nobility in prison and making scientists the future leaders. But, George Soros is not enough. What you have also, my main target today is Tony Blair. It's people like Tony Blair who gain a lot of sadistic pleasure in blowing the world up. That's a real picture. No, really.
Really?
No.
my making.
Anyways, right. So, Meredith?
Sure. So for me, before September 11th, I was already reaching for a different philosophy in international relations from a traditional one that has held sway since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Namely, that a country's internal affairs are for it, and you don't interfere unless it threatens you, or breaches a treaty, or triggers an obligation of alliance. I did not consider Iraq fitted into this philosophy, though I could see the horrible injustice done to its people by Saddam.
I know. I could not see Saddam kill his people, therefore I had to go in and blow up more people. Which is what happened in Iraq.
He was so painfully slow at killing his people.
Right, yeah. That's what I tell
Speed up the
people,
process.
People say, well, Obama ended the war. We got out of Iraq. Yeah, after destroying the shit out of it. It's like we did the job we went in there to do, and now there's nothing more to do, so we're out.
We're going to go to war with Syria.
Now we're going to go to the next country. We're going to go to Iran and Syria. We're just going to keep hopping, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, until we finally reach Russia, China. So that's so crazy. So even before 9/11, even before the world was going to go to hell, which I somehow had the intuition that it would. I had already started thinking that that we must have a global world without borders. That a country saying that my affair is my affair, that's so self-centered. No, your affair is my affair. That's what the whole argument is. This idea of right to protect. The idea that, okay, if we think you're not doing a good job in your nation, we can go in and take over. we have a right to intervene. We have a right, your business is my business, which is the basis for NSA spying, which is the basis for CIA spying. Then how else would I know what's going on in your nation? Of course, I've got to spy. I've got to look into your phone records. I've got to go through your wardrobe. I've got to know what's going on with your life. So, and the best example that this is the mentality that they really believe it. They really think that we have the right to rule the world. This is the best example. There are many examples, but this guy was a top advisor to Tony Blair. He teaches at universities. He's paid lots of money to go and speak at Oxford, LSE, Harvard, other. His name is Robert Cooper, and now I think he has some sort of a bureaucratic job at European Union, or in European Union. And he basically, he wrote a book called The Breaking of Nations, Order and Chaos in the 21st Century. It's an okay book, but his article is really good. His article in The Guardian, which people can download. If you type in the new liberal imperialism in Google, you can get it. And you can print it out. And I urge everybody to read it, because it's an essay he wrote, this is what's taught at universities. And I'm going to read some parts of it.
So he speaks up against it? Against this imperialism?
No,
He's
promotes
with Tony Blair.
this. He promotes this.
He's promoting it.
He's promoting imperialism.
Oh, yeah.
Like he says, to understand the present, we must first understand the past. For the past is still with us. So, you've got to look in the past. Well, how does he define the past? In the ancient world, order meant empire. Those within the empire had order, culture, and civilization. Outside it lay barbarians, chaos, and disorder. Which, if you look at really in history, the empire was the center of chaos and disorder. If you look at the Dark Ages, if you look at before Westphalia, the empire destroyed order. So then he says, in Europe, a middle way was found between the chaos and the empire, which is the state, the small state, which is Westphalia, which is completely bullshit. Because it's not, either we have anarchy or we have empire, so we got to figure a middle path.
Some balance of order.
Yeah, that's what they say. Well, Glass-Steagall is too extreme. We need Dodd-Frank. We need something that, that's not too strict. We need something in the middle.
That balances the rapists.
Yeah, you can't throw all rapists in prison. You got to allow them to rape once in a while. So, and it's so...
Otherwise they'll come twice as strong when they find you.
Anyway, so he says, therefore domestic order was purchased at the price of international anarchy. Therefore people accepted the Westphalia, or accepted the idea of not having an empire because they were afraid of anarchy. So there really was no intention to do better things. It was just behavioral. Man is just another animal. We adapt. We hate pain, so we go away from pain. It's very bestial because it denies any human reason that we can come up with a better idea on our own despite the pain and suffering. Even if that idea causes more pain, human beings take on more pain for the betterment of their children and the betterment of their future. Animals don't do that. Animals will eat up their children. Lions do that because, mothers, when lions have cubs, the mothers don't mate because they've got children to take care of. So the male lions will come in and kill the cubs so that he can mate with the mother. And there's lots
There
of
should be a law against
fun
that.
examples
I think so.
in nature. But human beings are above it. So, and then he says that, okay, so right now in the present, there are two different kinds of world we live in. There are two different kinds of states. The first is the pre-modern zone, the pre-modern, which is, all these former colonies where the state has failed and a Hobbesian war of all against all is underway, which is Somalia, third world countries, Africa, elsewhere. The second is the post-imperial, post-modern states, which are all developed, which are all at calm and peace and they're developing. And he says the best example of a postmodern state is European Union. This was 10 years ago. And if you look at European Union today, it's not the best example of a harmonized... of anything. Right. So he goes on. He goes on to say, okay, now the challenge... Now here's what he says, which is fun. The challenge to the postmodern world is to get used to the idea of double standards. Among ourselves, we operate on the basis of law, and open cooperative security. But when dealing with more old-fashioned kinds of states outside the postmodern continent, like Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Africa, when we deal with them, we need to revert to the rougher methods of an earlier era. Force, preemptive attack, deception, whatever is necessary to deal with those who still live in the 19th century world.
Oh God.
So that's the idea. The world is fixed. You can't change Africa. You can't change the third world countries. They're barbarians. So you got to deal with them like barbarians, you know.
Before that.
Like he says further, and this you should really read this. It's fun. Among ourselves, we keep the law, but when we are operating in the jungle, we must also use the laws of the jungle. In the prolonged period of peace in Europe, there has been a temptation to neglect our defenses. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so when he says, what is needed then is a new kind of imperialism, which aims at bringing order. So if you want to have order in the world, if you want to deal with these Afghanistan, Iraq, these backward cultures, you need an empire. Because he says the reason the world is in a chaos is because there is no empire.
Terrible.
Right. Good one.
Good one, eh?
Yeah. Where can we find a new empire?
And this guy is the advisor of Tony Blair. So this is
The
what
logic is so backwards in so many ways.
know.
It's like,
But this is what Westphalia was not, where the world is not fixed. Your advantage lies in the advantage of the other. Our advantage lies in developing Afghanistan, developing these regions. Our advantage does not lie them in treating like the laws of the jungle. That's barbarian. Now, Tony Blair, he said in 1998, I think at a election rally or something, and my vision for the new Labour Party is to become as the Liberal Party was in the 19th century, a broad coalition of those who believe in progress and justice. Now, what was the Liberal Party? Because you see, in 1800s, the British had lost the invasion of the United States, the 1812 war. They failed. The attempt to overthrow the United States failed. Then the Confederacy failed. The British wanted to back the southern states and overthrow Lincoln. That didn't work too. So what was formed was a Liberal Party, which was basically led by these two assholes, which is Henry Temple, or Lord Palmerston, on the left, and John Russell, who was the grandfather of Bertrand Russell. These two were both, at one time or the other, were prime ministers of Britain. And both of them oversaw, both their ideology was that, look, if Britain needs to exist, and we need to be on the top, we need to have free economic system. We need to have a monopoly on the world empire. So what you had was, under both of them, you saw the Irish potato famine, you saw the wars in China, you saw the Indian famines, multiple famines in India, because the idea was to force these people to grow cash crops, which is what we're doing right now in Afghanistan. People are being forced to grow opium. These farmers are being forced to die, which is what's happening in the United States. Farmers are being forced to grow corn, which is sold to ethanol, which is not allowed to get to food tables, which is what's happening elsewhere through Monsanto, where farmers grow food, but then they can't replant it, or they have to sell it to cartels. So that's Tony Blair's vision. That's the Liberal Party. And then you've got, then you have Tony Blair's other policy, which directly touches on Obama's healthcare, which is, under Tony Blair was launched a complete revamping of the healthcare system in Britain through institutions like National Healthcare Services and NICE, National Institute of Clinical Excellence. Yeah. And there were people in it like Irvin Stelzer and other people like Michael Rawlings. I'll come back to that later. Put forward a platform which is what's used under Obamacare, which is something called QALY. That how do you judge if a person is eligible for healthcare, for that particular service? So this is an article it's an interview with this guy, Michael Rollins, on the top, and the guy on the bottom is Donald Berwick, Sir Donald Berwick. They're both very open proponents of privatization of healthcare. And they were brought in, and they're also very close collaborators of people like Peter Orszag, who drafted Obama's healthcare plan. Now, this is an interview in the Time magazine. It's publicly available, and it's it's a section of the interview with the guy on the top, Michael Rollins. I'll ask the question. I need somebody to answer. Why is NICE needed? Shouldn't you get the drugs you need when you are sick, regardless of cost?
All healthcare systems are facing the problem of finite resources and almost infinite demand. And all healthcare resources systems have implicitly, if not explicitly, adopted some form of cost control. In the US, you do it by not providing healthcare to some people. We are best known for looking at a new drug, device, or diagnostic technique to see whether the increment in the cost of that treatment is worth the increment in the health gain.
How is that measured?
It's based on the cost of a measure called the quality adjusted life year. A QALY scores your health on a scale from 0 to 1. 0 if you're dead, and 1 if you're in perfect health. You find out as a result of a treatment where a patient would move up the scale. If you do a hip replacement, the patient might start at 0.5 and go up to 0.7, improving by 0.2. You can assume patients live for an average of 15 years following hip replacements. And 0.2 times 15 equals 3 quality adjusted life years. If the hip replacement costs more than 10,000...
No, 10,000 pounds.
Sorry, just because the article's it's slanted. If the hip replacement costs 10,000 pounds to do, it's 10,000 divided by the 3, which equals 3.33 GBP. That figure is the cost per QALY.
So that's how you determine the cost of a patient. Now, how do you know if it's... What determines perfect health? How do you know somebody's in perfect health?
Yeah, exactly.
The second thing is, what does cost of a treatment have to do with the patient? The cost of treatments, the cost of healthcare, is entirely dependent on the economic system you live in. Cost of treatment of hip replacement in India is very different from one in Somalia, is very different from one in the United States. The economy you live in, the nation you live in, what it's doing, that's what determines these parameters, like healthcare, the cost of healthcare. It's not patients. It's not the age of a patient. Plus, if you're having a patient living 15 years after hip replacement, with the current economy, which is already contracting, most people are not going to live that long. A lot of people are dying earlier. So therefore, you're furthering reducing their quality. Therefore, they are less eligible they're less eligible for hip replacements or other surgeries because, the economy isn't doing that well. You're probably going to die in 10 years. 10 years ago, you probably would have died in 15 years, but not anymore. People are dying sooner. It's a bad. Times are bad. Times are rough. Therefore, we got to cut. We got to kill. That's the whole argument. Why are we doing this? Why are we having these economists brought in to mass educate the population on rationing healthcare when the system is obviously corrupt, when Wall Street obviously is getting trillions of dollars of free money, and when there is no reason for an economy to be the way it is if we go back to what Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy were doing. And then also Tony Blair is, surprisingly, this guy who promotes cost cutting is also on the board of the directors of JP Morgan. This guy gets millions, he's a banker. This guy gets millions to be on the board of JP Morgan as an advisor. Comes in for a few days out of a year, gets paid millions.
But he was also on the head for this NICE program in England.
Talk about conflict of interest. So that's something we're dealing with, where we either go for Peace of Westphalia or World War III. And let me just see if I have anything else remaining. I think we're coming to a close.
Oh, no.
And, huh?
He looks old now.
What picture?
The one with the
Oh, right.
chick walking with the guy.
Right. Yeah. That's from an old class I gave in Houston. But
50
you know
Shades
that's
of Genocide.
yeah. Like, have you guys read 50 Shades of Grey? Or you know what it is? It's a very popular book right now. You know, like you've got Hunger Games, 50 Shades of Grey. If you go to Chapters or Indigo or these these bookstores, these are the books you'll say, oh, New York Times bestseller. 50 Shades of Grey basically is a fiction story. I read the Wikipedia page. I didn't do it. But it's a fiction story between a rich banker, like this really rich millionaire, who has a girlfriend who he pays to have sex with, but the whole relationship is very sadomasochistic, where and ultimately she leaves him because of the emotional and just because of the bestial nature of the relationship. But she comes, it's really complicated, and it's really bestial, and it really reflects the sick mind of the population. This is a very popular book. It's a very popular romantic novel. So my idea was that if I had to write a book on Obama, Susan Rice, and Samantha Powers, I would call it 50 Shades of Genocide, because of the sadomasochistic pleasure they get out of killing people.
I just read a small article about Samantha Power, and she said the politics she's doing is atrocities, and every day when she opens the paper, she still can cry when she hears what she did.
Oh, really? Well, that's sad. I didn't come across that article. But no. I mean, it just reflects. The point is that Obama's closest people right now are psychopaths. This guy, Cass Sunstein, on the bottom right, he is the husband of Samantha Powers. He resigned because of the angry backlash. He's a Harvard professor, and he wrote papers that conspiracy theorists should be thrown in jail or should be brainwashed. Anybody who doesn't believe what the government is telling them is something's wrong with you mentally, and you're a danger to society. And he's been exposed many times by us, by other people. His wife, Samantha Powers, she became the United Nations ambassador, and she also became Obama's major proponent, major woman who would organize the Congress that we need to bomb Libya, along with Susan Rice. They are the most important proponents of executive power. The president is above the law. The president is above the law because the world is in a crisis, and we can't wait for a bill to go through Congress and blah, blah, blah. That takes too long. That's not convenient. So, and their track record is pretty bad. So, that's part of Dick Cheney's memoir, actually, his biography, where he said, my only regret is that I didn't get to bomb Syria, and Obama will.
He really said something like that? Or?
Yeah. You can read it.
I should. And Dick Cheney's memoir, In My Time, it sounds as excruciating as you might imagine. No apologies, no regrets, plenty of self-satisfied machismo. If Cheney had it all to do over again, the only thing he'd do differently is bomb the shit out of Syria. Here's a rundown of the highlights. In June 2007, Cheney urged George W. Bush to bomb a suspected nuclear reactor in Syria. I again made the case for U.S. military action against the reactor, Mr. Cheney wrote about a meeting on the issue. But I was a lone voice. After I finished, the president asked, does anyone here agree with the vice president? Not a single hand went up around the room. The Israelis eventually took it out. He tried to get Colin Powell fired after 2004 for insufficiently supporting the war in Iraq. His resignation in January 2005, Cheney says, was for the best.
Okay. Now, the point is, you've had presidents in the past who have continued that idea of Westphalia, that we exist for the advantage of the other. It's not and it's very different from what you've seen since Kennedy's assassination, since Obama, that our advantage exists in bombing the shit out of everybody. That's not what United States represent. So an example is FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. This is from a really good book which everybody in this room should read. It's a small book. It's called As He Saw It. And it's a sort of like a biography on Franklin Roosevelt's last years during World War II, written by his son, Elliot Roosevelt, because Elliot was always part of FDR's team. Like, he was his personal assistant. He would draft messages, speeches, etc., with his father. And so these are, I want somebody to read it.
As embarrassed as FDR was by what he saw in Liberia, he was, according to first-hand accounts, visibly shaken by what he viewed in a brief stop in British Gambia. On his arrival at Casablanca, FDR told his son, "The thing is, the colonial system means war. Exploit the resources of an India, a Burma, a Java. Take all the wealth out of those countries, but never put anything back into them. Things like education, sanitation, decent standards of living, minimum health care requirements. All you are doing is stirring up the kind of trouble that leads to war. I must tell Churchill what I found out about his British Gambia today." This morning at about 8:30, we drove through Bathurst to the airfield. The natives were just getting to work, in rags, glum-looking. They, his British hosts, told us that the natives would look happier around noontime, when the sun would have burned off the dew and the chill.
Oh, God.
I was told that the prevailing wages of these men was 1 and 9. 1 shilling, 9 pence. Less than 50 cents a day. 50 cents a day. Besides which they were given half a cup of rice, dirt, disease, very high mortality rate. I asked life expectancy. You'd never guess what it is. 26 years. These people are treated worse than livestock. Their cattle live longer. Churchill may have thought I wasn't serious last time at Argentina. At Argentia. He'll find out this time.
Right. So, that's the empathy required right now, the sympathy and the empathy required right now to save the world. It's people really getting pissed at what the world is. Go ahead.
FDR told Elliot as meetings got underway, "We've got to make it clear to the British from the very outset that we don't intend to be simply a good time Charlie who can be used to help the British Empire out of a tight spot and then be forgotten forever. I think I speak as America's president when I say that America won't help England in this war simply so that she will be able to continue to ride roughshod over colonial peoples." There were bitter arguments over Roosevelt's plan to provide the Russians with American material support, with Churchill declaring that such aid was wasted and that Russia and the aid would fall to the Germans. But the most intense clash came over the question of the future of the British Empire. Roosevelt initiated the discussion by cleverly turning the British free trade ideology against themselves, demanding an end to the empire preferences.
This is fun. All right. I'll be Churchill.
Okay.
The British Empire trade agreements are...
Churchill began heavily.
You can be
I see. Yes, those empire trade agreements are a case in point. It is because of them that the people of India and Africa, of all the colonial Near East and Far East, are still as backward as they are.
Churchill's neck reddened and he crouched forward. Mr. President, England does not propose for a moment to lose its favored position among the British dominions. The trade that has made England great shall continue, and under these conditions prescribed by England's ministers.
You see, it is along in here somewhere that there is likely to be disagreement between you, Winston, and me. I am firmly of the belief that if we are to arrive at a stable peace, it must involve the development of backward countries, backward peoples. How can this be done? It can't be done, obviously, by 18th century methods. Now,
Who's talking about 18th century methods?
whichever of your ministers recommends a policy which takes a raw material out of a colonial country, but which returns nothing to the people of that country in consideration. 20th century methods involve bringing industry to these colonies. 20th century methods include increasing the standard of living by educating them, by bringing them sanitation, by making sure that they get a return for the raw wealth of their community.
You mentioned India?
Yes, I can't believe that we can fight a war against fascist slavery and at the same time not work to free all people over the world from a backward colonial policy.
What about Philippines?
I'm glad you mentioned them. They get their independence, in 1946, and they've gotten modern sanitation, modern education. Their rate of illiteracy has gone steadily down.
There can be no tampering with the empire's economic agreements.
They're artificial.
They are the foundation of our greatness.
The peace cannot include any continued despotism. The structure of the peace demands and will get equality of peoples.
Right. So that's very different from two kinds of world, and if you want to deal with the third world, you got to be barbaric concept that right now is governing. That's what this guy Robert Cooper said. Or Franklin Roosevelt's idea is that no, you got to develop these backward people. You got to bring them sanitation, healthcare, food, literacy. And it's our role as America to do that. We're not going to go along with your British policies of blowing the world up and helping you enslave the rest half of the world. And that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with an oligarchy. Dealing with an empire like Zeus on the left. And on the right, you have, this is a beautiful painting. It's not beautiful, but it's a very accurate painting of, the god Saturn eating his own children. That's what an empire does. It eats up its own children. It kills its own future. It's by Goya, who was a painter. But that's the gruesome idea of an empire. It's not there to have an advantage over the enemy. The intention of an empire is just to kill. We just kill. Mass kill. Just death. And the counterpoint to that is Westphalia. The counterpoint to that right now is working with us with Glass-Steagall for the Bering Strait, for these projects, because you have to free the world. You've got to bring people to a higher perspective of what their identity can be. You can't be somebody better. Your nation can be something better. You must take a part in it. And that's something right now, which is our fight. It's been done before. And I hope through the Westphalia, going through what Colbert did, which, we've written articles. I have some articles printed out, some homework for people to do, to take and read, which goes into much more detail. But that's what makes our movement unique, is that we're the only ones with that intention, and we're the only ones bringing it out in the streets every day, organizing people that you must think the same way. If you want to change history, you have to change your identity to be a historical identity. And with John F. Kennedy's assassination anniversary coming up in a few days, actually in 5 days, it's on the 22nd, there's a very important fight right now we're waging in the United States to revive his legacy, to revive his spirit. And with that, I think I'll close. Here. Or rather, they call Obamacare, which I don't know why, because Obama, frankly, does not care. So what you had since 2008 was you had with the coming in of Obama, with the coming in of these behavioral economists with Obama, people like Peter Orszag, Ram Emanuel, Ezekiel Emanuel, all these behavioral economists who Obama hired to draft his Obamacare, the realization of the population and LaRouche was that, holy shit, this is a policy to kill us. Because when you're putting accountants in charge of healthcare, when you're putting a dictatorship of money over the priority of providing healthcare, of providing care and service to the sick and elderly, that's a Nazi healthcare plan. And what you had in 2008 was, despite Obama's overwhelming majority in the election, you had a mass strike across the population, where you had congressmen, besieged with riots pretty much in their town hall meetings, where they would have these regular town hall meetings they've been having for so many years, but suddenly there's an outpouring of anger in the population. The result of which was in 2010, the Democratic Party got their ass kicked. You had a majority of the Democrats in the Congress who despite being incumbents in their districts for many decades in some cases, lost their election just because they would not budge from backing up Obama, because they stuck to the party line, which is we gotta stand with Obama, we gotta stand with the healthcare, which the population hated for legitimate reasons. And what you had ever since then, since 2009, was LaRouche identified Obama's personality, that this is it. With the healthcare plan now in full effect, we are putting now the mustache on Obama's face. This plan is an intention to kill people, and Obama knows it. Obama's willfully going along with it. So that resulted in our famous poster, which was immediately brought into the Library of Congress also. It's archived there for changing political opinion in a very short period of time. And the intention was to tell the population, wake up. You are dealing with the same policies you've been putting up since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And what you've had ever since then is LaRouche and our organization leading the fight in the United States on principle that you've got to impeach Obama and shut down Wall Street. The result was about a month or 2 months ago when Obama's Affordable Care Act finally started coming into effect, millions of people got notices in their mailboxes. Millions of people more got to know that they are not eligible for health care, or their premiums are going up, or their chemotherapy centers are shutting down, hospitals are shutting down. I mean, we had a very vivid case where our team was organizing in Washington State in one of the counties, and the population, we've organized in the town before, but when we set up there about a month and a half ago, we had an outpouring of angry, emotional people. The reason was their town doctor, a family practitioner, who has been practicing there for about 20 years, who has a family practice which was started by his grandfather, committed suicide because he would not be reimbursed by the Medicare, because his whole clinic was being shut down because it's not profitable enough, because you're not penalizing your patients enough, because you're giving too much care. Because that's what's happening across the United States, where private practices, rural hospitals, small clinics in rural areas, because it makes no sense having, the United States has had no infrastructure to build large hospitals in rural areas, so what you have is basically small clinics sustaining this rural population. But now, with the denial of Medicare payments to these clinics are either being forced to lay off staff or shut down.
The only way to liberate ourselves from its destructive effects is to restore the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. Its repeal in 1999 opened the door to the growth of the biggest financial bubble in history. We must separate commercial banking from investment banking and let Wall Street sink under the weight of its own bad investments. No more bailouts or bail-ins for Wall Street. Number 3, retire/impeach President Obama. He's repeatedly demonstrated that he is incapable of performing the job for which we hired him. This is not complicated. The This is what always happens. When someone fails, we find someone who can do the job better. Multiple legal authorities have already assembled articles for impeachment. This man has failed you and will allow you to die with his inept and undeniably lethal policies that masquerade as health care reform. That sounds strong. It is strong. I wouldn't say that if not for the hard, cold facts that I'm faced with on an everyday basis. It's time for the American people to wake up before it's too late.
But what you're having, ever since then, ever since this really broke the dam, and what it resulted was you had people even like Bill Clinton, who has been for the past so many years been protecting Obama, came out with a very strong leaflet this week bashing Obama, saying you must keep your promise, and I'm telling you personally to reverse the law if necessary, to give people back what they were told that they would get, which is a better health care, a universal health care. And what you had was Obama was forced to come out and apologize and say, well, I give people an extension of a year. Yeah, but that can't happen. The law has already been into effect. The prices have already raised. People have gotten new pensions, new healthcare plans. And you had as soon as that happened, you had, within a day, you had healthcare companies met with Obama, came out with a statement, yeah, well, we're sorry, that's not going to happen. It's already gone into effect. Millions of people have already gotten their healthcare plans, which is impossible to reverse. Plus, the whole Congress is going like, well, where do we come in then? What gives you the authority to tell us we went along with you to pass this law. We went through all the bullshit, and now it's not working. You say, oh, you're going to change it? No, you can't change it. It's the Congress that changes a law, that passes a law, that has the authority to change a law. So it just reflects a complete Nero emperor attitude that, oh, I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it all better. No, you're not. It doesn't work that way. There's a constitution and a law process involved. So what you had yesterday was something pretty major happened that people could not forecast. You're having now many bills being brought forward to change the law by congressmen because Obama's word is not enough. So one of those bills to change that law went on the floor to vote yesterday. It was introduced by Republican Congressman Upton. I don't know where he's from, but and it's not even a great bill. It's a shitty bill, frankly. But it does, try to amend the fact that, if people like their health care, they can keep the health care. But even if they get another health care, the whole system is designed to fail and to kill people. But that bill resulted in 39 Democrats breaking away and voting with the Republicans on the bill. Many of those Democrats are up for re-elections. Their people are telling them, if you want to vote, if you want to stay in office, you better vote. You better vote with the Upton bill, because we want to change now. People are dying. Hospitals are being shut down. Patients are dying. Our organizers being besieged with relatives, with people who are coming out and saying, even now in much more manifold African Americans coming out, especially young African Americans coming out saying, what do I do? How can I participate in changing the policy, in changing the nation? So full-time political and the International LaRouche Political Organization. We have a class tonight lined up to give you a sense of the kind of solidarity and leadership it's required and has required in the past to change the paradigm we are in right now. I'm going to begin right now with I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go through the past months and the past week's development, which have been very, very rapid, which are very rapidly changing the world we are living in. And it's really something you're not going to see in the media, or this is something you're not going to pick up like sound bites in the media. And what you saw pretty much in early September was Obama and the Saudis intent on going into a war with Syria. And what you saw was a population revolted against that. a war-weary population in the United States called into their Congress, called into their senators, average people like yourself said, no, we're not going to go into a war. It's completely idiocy, and I'll go into some aspects of it later. And not only that, you also had a very strong move in institutions, both in Congress and military institutions, to this war mobilization. So what you had was Obama had to backtrack, had to get, without even informing his own cabinet. People like Chuck Hagel were told later, after the press conference, yeah, we're not going to go to war. And what you had was Obama got his ass handed to him, where the military said, if you go to war, the Congress will move to impeach you. So what you had was, but then the problem was people let Obama off the hook. And what you had later was a government shutdown orchestrated by Obama and his controllers in Wall Street with honchos in both parties. A government shutdown intent on creating a panic situation in the population. That we're in a crisis, we don't have enough money, so we got to cut somewhere. And for a little while, people were confused as to how to really make sense of this government shutdown. What's the intent? Why is this happening? Including our own associates. And it became very clear very soon when it was broken, the news was broken, and it was revealed to us and other people that before Obama would meet with any congressional leaders on this government shutdown crisis, the first people he met with were the top CEOs of Wall Street. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, Anshu Jain of Deutsche Bank, and others. Before Obama or anybody of the White House would meet with any congressional leaders in Congress or any senators from either party, the government shutdown crisis was already orchestrated and decided by Obama and these Wall Street CEOs. The intention was to create, do you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. I wasn't clear. Sorry. That's okay. So, yeah, the intention was to create a crisis to continue the hyperinflationary policies, continue the money printing, continue the buying of billions of dollars of worthless Wall Street shit which the Federal Reserve buys every month. So what you've had ever since then now is we're now at a tipping point. We're now at a point where either we can be the best generation or the last generation. And if you think that's a little too extreme, those were the exact words of John F. Kennedy. That we have a chance right now to either be the best generation, which is to move with our neighbors on this planet on a mission for cooperation, or we can stick to our present axioms and assumptions and fears and be the last generation and be our own destruction. So now I'm going to give you a little idea of why the situation is at a tipping point. The first is a lot to do with the healthcare, or rather the death count, or go to drastic measures. I mean, we know as a fact through the United States Bureau that the suicide rate in the United States and in Europe has gone up. So that's the policy you're dealing with where you have a culture who's being crushed, whose optimism and all hope is being crushed. But that's when LaRouche, about a month ago, brought up that we now need medical professionals coming out in the open, saying what Obamacare is. Enough of people coming to our table, contributing, throwing $100, $500, I agree with you, but I can't sign up. That's not what's going to change history. We need people putting their life on the line, like us, coming out, stating your name, and saying, I am a doctor, I'm a medical professional, and this policy is mass murderers. And we had that, where you had a family physician. His name is Dr. Mark Shelley. He is a practitioner out of Pennsylvania. He's been practicing for 30 years. And he started an organization called Doctors Against Murderous Obamacare. And he has ever since received overwhelming support and also negative backlash over his move. But what you see in him is is a regular doctor who's committed, who has been for the past decades committed to providing care, providing service to his patients, and is being forced to change his conscience because of the economic conditions imposed upon him. Because if he wants to make a living, he has to deny health care. So I'm going to play a little bit of his press conference, which he put out to announce, and it's very widely. It's not. It's being, his press conference and his leaflet, his statement is being very widely covered in a lot of local newspapers across northeastern United States: Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Rhode Island, all the northeastern states. So I'm just going to play a little bit, give people a sense. This one.
As a physician and an American, I feel compelled at this time of peril to address the changes that I see in the process of the actual delivery of health care to the American people. From my perspective as a family practitioner, and from my concern as a citizen, and for my fellow man, I must speak out to explain the dangers that I see in the implementation of American health care today, as exemplified by what is known as Obamacare. What I see being done today is chillingly consistent with the findings and warnings of Dr. Leo Alexander, the chief consultant to the U.S. prosecutors at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal after World War II. In his article entitled Medical Science Under Dictatorship, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine on July 14, 1949, Dr. Alexander made clear what happens to medicine when it, quote, becomes subordinated to the guiding philosophy of a dictatorship, unquote. That dictatorship today is money. Now, to remedy this crisis, we must undertake three important initiatives. Number one, separate the purpose and principle of medicine from a diseased economic system. Restore the essence of the Hippocratic Oath as the philosophical center of the medical profession. The practice of medicine is meant to serve the development of people, not Wall Street and the financial conglomerates, with a population reduction agenda. Hippocrates said, "It's the duty of the physician not only to do that which immediately belongs to him, but likewise to secure the cooperation of the sick, of those who are in attendance, and of all the external agents." Number two, the economic problem. We need to restore the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. If you don't know the Glass-Steagall Act, you need to learn it. Okay, it's the same Wall Street debt bubble, which is crushing the federal government, is crushing the medical profession, as well as the rest of the economy.
So, and you had even, and Obama has threatened to veto the Upton bill. Where's his promise? Obama has said, if this bill goes ahead, I will cancel it, I will veto it. And one congressman told our organizers in Washington, D.C., that I haven't seen such panic in the House since 9/11. Because these congressmen's phones are ringing off the hook. And that's what the fight is about. Obama is getting his ass handed to him. The administration is completely losing it. And if you look at, that's just the healthcare. That was the only accomplishment of Obama in the past 4 years. And he's lost it. The second thing is, if you look at the war drive, where, especially over Syria, the whole thing is so crazy. People's intentions and people's priorities are so misplaced, where, if we have vague evidence from the same broom closet that Dick Cheney got his evidence at the Pentagon, that, Assad is using chemical weapons. So therefore we gotta go bomb Assad. We gotta go invade Syria. But we have concrete proof that the other side, the rebels, like them or not, they are beheading people, in some cases the wrong people. They're killing their enemies and eating their hearts out and posting it on YouTube. But that's fine. That's okay, As long as you're blowing people up to pieces and eating their hearts, that's okay. But if you use chemical weapons, that's the red line. Now you've crossed the red line. So it's just so hypocritical, the whole argument to bomb Syria. There's no evidence that there even is chemical weapons. You have a really good article in the Politico by Phil Giraldi, who's a CIA, ex-CIA agent, there is no evidence that
What
there is
Assad
Syria,
did,
that Assad,
Okay.
that Assad used chemical weapons or has chemical weapons. And that's where, you had Russia and China flank Kerry, flank Obama, and even and say, hey, if the whole issue is about chemical weapons, if that's the basis of you going to war, then why don't we go into Syria and confiscate those chemical weapons? And Assad said, yes, please do. Please come in with your investigators and go through all my stockpiles and find out if you get any proof of that. And the result was none. The result was absolutely none. The war drive was halted. The result was that the Saudis freaked out, where you had Prince Turki bin Faisal, who is Bandar's brother, came out in the press openly attacking the US military for not going along with Obama, for not going along with the Saudis, attacking General Dempsey by name, the one person who has the whole time stood up to Obama, who is the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, which is the highest ranking army. I mean, this guy is the head of the United States Armed Forces. So, and then what you had, what you have is also a really good article in the Political, which is a new publication being started in Washington, D.C., and as one of it has a newspaper edition and a print edition too. Thanks. No, I don't want you. Okay, so this Political magazine in its what are you doing?
I just don't like the cracking up.
Okay, so one of its main articles in its in its first editorial was a really good article called Obama versus the Generals. And what you have is this lady, Rosa Brooks, I think that's her name, write up an article where she interviews many of the leading Pentagon and Army officials in Washington, D.C., asking them, who is it in the military that Obama's close to, that Obama listens to? Franklin Roosevelt had his close aides, like Douglas MacArthur, who also was advising the Kennedys. So who does Obama go to when he has questions?